case on it. Call the meeting to order. If we would have the Pledge of Allegiance. Tony, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
We were talking.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Was there an idea?
Bunch of ideas. Okay, Jenna, if we could have a planning commission roll call.
Burkett,
Here.
Conway,
Here.
McAvinci,
Present.
Nigel, here. Olson, here. Cowshan,
With notice.
MacArthur,
Here. Okay, if we could have a village council roll call.
Shilas,
Present.
George,
Here.
Reed, here. Eden,
Here.
Nigel,
Here,
Randazzo,
Here.
Bryce,
With notice.
And the DDA board.
Amori,
Do we have anybody from the DDA?
We don't. Matt may join us in a little bit. He had a conflict. There's a few people that are out sick. So that's why OTV is here. So the meeting's being recorded so they can watch it later.
Okay. You have the agenda. We need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Public comment. It could be if
Approval
you-
of agenda.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we need approval of the agenda first, I think, is next.
Number, we just did.
We just did that.
Oh, yeah, we did. Never mind.
Okay, sorry about that. I did not hear that.
They're so used to me skipping stuff that
I know when you're
they just
on.
automatically look for it. Okay, public comment. You have 3 minutes if you would like on any item on the agenda. Go ahead.
Want me to stand?
Yes.
Okay, hi, I'm Daly Stranley. I know I met some of you guys before. If you look at your zoning maps, you'll see in R3, there's a large orange chunk, and I own the majority of that chunk. So, nice to meet you guys. The main reason I am here today is that I have been discussing with Ryan and Jenna. I want to down the road own livestock, and I own just under 27 acres in the village limits, which the only people who have that is the school district and the village itself. So I'm pretty much the only anomaly here. And the current ordinances do not stand for any livestock. They don't really have set rules, I know, besides the chickens. And I personally don't want chickens. So it doesn't exactly apply to me. So I'm hoping that, because we've been looking into, I have to go through rezoning. Well, I looked into the biggest farms in our area, which most people, I don't know if you ever heard of like Oats. We know the Oats farm they moved, and the Abraham Ranch. Those are the only two farms that like are large here that have that kind of property, and they're both still currently listed as residential properties. So the idea of zoning wasn't going to exactly fit me because I'm residential. I could rezone, but that's not so. From the examples I've seen, that didn't really necessarily need to be done. So we've been trying to figure out how do I go about, because I want to do it the legal way. I don't ever want to get animals, and my worry is somehow has an issue with it, and I have to then get rid of them. I'm not somebody who does that. My animals are my babies, and I take it very serious. So my hope is that when you lovely people are doing your ordinances, you can somehow write in like the township. The township current ordinances are that every 2.5 acres, there's classes of animals. The first class is like your domestic animals. Second class includes horses, goats, like pigs, basically your basic farm animals. And then there's a class 3, which is any animal under 75 pounds. The 75-pound law, you can have up to 25 of those, anything under 75 pounds. And then it lists like a specific rule for those. But it's anything over 2.5 acres, you can have one, and then anything over that is 1 acre equals plus another animal. So you can see it can get very, very large very quick. I don't plan on having a zoo. I don't want to do that, but my issue with zoning is when I was filling out the application, they want you to list exactly what you want. I don't know what that is yet. I know I don't want an obscene amount. It's just me and my husband and eventually our 2 kids. So I'm trying to have just something small. And the only neighbors I have is one person who comes into my property. If you can kind of see there's like a little part that's, what color is that? I don't know.
Yellow.
Yellow, the little yellow house. I know them, they've already mentioned them, that I want to do animals, they're okay with it. My other neighbor on the other side that I've talked to, they both are on board. The apartments, I don't know what you call those, that's just an apartment complex. The apartments, they're all obviously owned by so many different people, so that's the only other people who butt up to me. In my acreage, you can see it's all woods. So I could have put animals here and y'all wouldn't even know they were there. There's that much acreage at this point. So I don't plan on putting them right next to someone's door. And in the ordinances for Branson Township, there is rules that you cannot be within a certain line of someone's property. You have to be a certain far away, area away. And I plan on having them obviously close to my house for predator reasons. So I'm hoping when you look at the ordinances, you can look at Branson Township and hopefully write me in. So I don't have to go through the formal process.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else can? Did you want anything to say? Or okay. All right, we'll move on to new business. The public informational meeting in regards to the review of the zoning ordinance update led by Doug from where are you? Carlisle Workman. Sure,
All right, thank you. So do I have to talk into this?
You don't have to. I think it'll get you wherever you are, more or less.
All right, I'll try to talk. I stood up here and it's like I feel so separated from everyone. Thanks for having me tonight to talk a little bit about what the program talks about as alternative zoning. These are some sections that aren't in every zoning ordinance. I don't want to say some aren't new, but maybe new to the village. And really kind of get your input on some of these. I know we're kind of in the midst of Zach, Michelle from my office, and myself, and I'm working on your new zoning ordinance. And we thought this is a great opportunity to get everyone together and talk about a couple of things that maybe aren't fully integrated into your zoning ordinance right now that maybe you might want to start thinking about. So that's really kind of what we're here today. And by the way, although we're talking about kind of two main topics, and those will be kind of form-based code issues, and we'll talk all about what that means, and planning unit developments, or PUDs. If you guys have any other thoughts or ideas that you could bring,
We can't hear you well.
Sorry.
yeah, I'll try to.
You can move it if you want.
How about if I could carry it?
You could.
How's that? Is that okay?
That's good, thank you.
All right. I feel like Phil Donahue. See, I'm dating myself. Phil Donahue. If you remember that, you're not young. If you guys have other ideas that are bothering you, anything that you want me to bring back and go over with Zach, because he's the one that's kind of do the yeoman's work on the ordinance itself, but we consult, so I know what's going on, so I know it. But if you need me to bring anything back with any of the work he's done so far, or something maybe you don't see, definitely tell me. I would like to say the last time I was here, there was a Christmas tree behind me, so it's a little easier getting from my car to the front of this place. So again, welcome. And so let's talk. I think this will work.
I think so.
So let's talk a little bit about form-based code. So, what this means and how it might apply to the village. So first off, there has been, if you guys are members of the Michigan Association of Planning, many communities are. I'm not sure if you guys are as a group. You all are as a group. That's good. By the way, their conference this year is in Mackinac, which is going to be really cool if you can go. But Michigan Association of Planning has had, and others, Michigan Municipal League, Michigan Township Association, over the years they've had a number of training sessions on this topic, on form-based coding. How many of you have gone to that kind of training that MML or MAP has put on? Okay, so Ryan. So All right, good. Well, then I think this is set up well for a group that's kind of hearing it for the first time. So the things that, well, let me back up, and we'll get more into the specifics, but the really broad brush strokes about form-based coding or form-based coded zoning. So it's not, it's in your zoning ordinance, it's not anything that foreign. Definitely a different concept than although some of your ordinance has some of the language in it, but a little bit different of a concept. But basically, form-based code allows a wide variety of land uses within a zoning district, rather than just this is zoned office, this is zoned commercial, this is zoned residential, this is zoned heavy commercial. Oh, I'm sorry, the light commercial can't go to heavy commercial, and then that causes property owners to have to get variances and go to the zoning board of appeals and maybe get rezonings and things like that. Form-based code is more interested in how the final product looks in your village. And so how would a doctor's office next to a retail store, next to you name it, a small apartment building, how would that look if they're all next to each other? Well, if you think about how the village here developed over time, and really any downtown that's of any age, there was no zoning back when the village of Ortonville first started to get built. You look at the village around here, Clarkston, Holly, where I live in the city of Plymouth, and so Plymouth, I grew up in Royal Oak, so Royal Oak, Birmingham. Those communities, there were no zoning ordinances. Those communities kind of organically developed with buildings that were right next to, like touching each other, in essence, just like some of the buildings downtown here, basically touching each other on property lines, very close to the front property line, without a lot of concern or requirements about the types of uses that were in those things. And so what we found over time is traditional zoning is what the village has, although there's some ordinance beats around the bush on this issue. Traditional zoning doesn't really allow this sort of organic development of an area. And so the form-based code tries to bring that back to a community while still not just letting anything go. There still are some restrictions. It's really whatever kind of restrictions it wants. But it allows a lot more flexibility in design and use and how it looks. And really, it's the whole idea is that maybe it will encourage some additional businesses to your community or additional development that you wouldn't have normally got because your zoning is so strict. So that, I mean, in a nutshell, that's really what form-based coding is, or form-based code is. It's a much more flexible zoning arrangement while still allowing some control of the local community and what happens. So, what are we concerned about? What are the considerations when we start to look at a form-based code? We want to look at the appearance of the corridor. So early on, we would do they would do a kind of a survey, not a physical survey like a surveyor, but a survey of the area. What businesses are there? What are the characteristics that you like? What is the appearance of the corridor that you want to maintain for your development? We look at land use versus land form, and this is the flexibility that I was talking about. When I say land use, I'm talking about commercial, residential, office, industrial versus land form. How does it look? How does it present? How does a new development interact with each other, the neighboring? How does it react to the pedestrian scale, to people? How does it look and feel to people who are coming and going? So that's the difference between land use and land form. How does it look? How does it function? And then how does that impact your existing downtown? What impacts? I've got a form-based code code in the city of Saline where they had a traditional downtown, and then they had kind of an outside area that they wanted to kind of expand those ideas, those concepts of their existing downtown, kind of east and west on Michigan Avenue. So these are some of the things that, you know, Planning Commission ultimately, the Village Council will have to grapple with, and we'll help you with those considerations. Again, high-level discussion right now. If you want to go more in this direction, and we'll ask some questions at the end of this to help determine if you want to go in that direction. You know, Zach and myself will kind of get more into the weeds as we go. So, what are the benefits of form-based code? I've talked about some of these. We'll stand up here because there's a lot here slides, so I'm going to read it from this direction. You know, the benefits are the uses frame the public space, kind of like with what we have downtown. They're not spread apart. There's not huge green belts in the front. There's not parking, a ton of parking in the front. There's a relationship between the buildings, kind of like downtowns have kind of grew over time. Also a framing of the public street, in that this kind of ordinance, if done correctly, will help promote pedestrian access along the fronts of development. There's requirements for windows. There's requirements for actual entryways and doorways in the front of buildings, rather than necessarily all at the back or all at the side, to kind of encourage that activity in the front of buildings. If you'll note, like traditional zoning, unfortunately over the years, you know, parking, and I understand parking is a big thing. However, parking has come to dominate some of our areas that have grown over the years, where, you know, think about it, modern shopping center that maybe was approved in Brandon Township, or maybe approved here in the village over the time, or Independence Township, and you're probably going to think of a lot of parking in front of the building. And how does that compare to a downtown? It's very different, vastly different. And so that's you know, one of the other real benefits is that we try to de-emphasize parking, while still, of course, you have to have parking. We're not in a carless society, but kind of de-emphasize parking to the sides and the rear, pedestrian, architectural, and views to the front. There are predictable outcomes to this. And what I mean by that is traditional zoning has setback lines. So you have to maintain a minimum 15-foot front yard setback, for example. So that's your setback. That's your setback. Well, there's nothing in the ordinance that says someone can't have a building 50 feet back. The other person has 15 feet back. The other person has 30 feet back. And so you've got this front building lines that are going like this along the road. Form-based code, a true form-based code, has requirements for a maximum setback, not a minimum setback, so that buildings are within a pretty close range of one another, so that the fronts are sort of lining up. This is, although we do it all over, we actually did a kind of a hybrid form-based code on Big Beaver in Troy. And so some of the new development that's occurred on Big Beaver over the last 5, 6, 7 years would have never happened without the form-based code that our office did for Big Beaver. And they were much in that same mindset that I started. I don't do work for Troy directly, but my office does. And I remember the discussions, you know, they were, we can't have a restaurant next to the office. It's not zoned for that. Oh, we can't have, you know, and they just, at first, that's just not how Big Beaver was. And if you think about it, even 6, 7 years ago, and you think about all the stuff that's developed on 16 mile in Troy, and a lot of that has to do with the form-based code, form-based code hybrid that they developed. So they have predictable, and in that case, I guess where it's going with that is they have somewhat, there's a build to line. You can see that sort of developing. this. It takes time, everything takes time in land use and zoning, but it is occurring. Now, my last little bullet point there, bubble or whatever you call that, is if you've looked through your zoning ordinance, and I've looked through your zoning ordinance a bit, some of the concepts that we're talking about here are currently in your zoning ordinance for a lot of different districts. There's some build to lines, there's some maximum setbacks in certain districts. There is some mixed use, there's some mixed uses going on. I gave you a copy of your, I guess I would call it your use list. I'm not sure what it's called.
Uses permitted by district.
Yeah, uses permitted by district. So Article 2, and I highlighted with a highlighter, because I don't know how to do that on the computer, but actually I highlighted that and copied it, but your downtown district. And just, as you'll see from that highlighted list, your downtown district already allows the most uses of any of your zoning districts. And if you look at that compared to some of your other districts, you know, your residential districts, you know, your commercial district, just go through the districts here. You'll see that some are heavy in the commercial. Of course, the commercial will be heavy in the commercial, the opposite heavy in the office, the residential heavy in the residential. But then you'll see there's blanks where there's nothing permitted in those districts. Well, your downtown district does a pretty good job of allowing a whole lot of stuff. And as we get into this, I guess the question is going to be, one, while some of the form-based code ideas are already reflected in the zoning ordinance, they're, in my review, they're kind of sprinkled in various locations throughout your zoning ordinance. Maybe we bring these together to form a little more cohesive district that really hits home that this is a form-based code. Now, and the other thing we're going to talk about is, do we want this just in the downtown? Should we, expand these concepts to other parts of the village? Generally speaking, some communities have adopted a full 100% form-based code that covers the entire community. When you get into your single-family residential zones, it's probably not needed, or in some cases maybe not desirable, because your single-family districts, most people buy into a neighborhood because they want the predictability that their next door is going to be a home and not something else. So this flexibility doesn't work that well necessarily in residential districts, or primarily that alone. But as we get into your commercial office, M15 corridor, all of that, we start to formalize this a little bit more. And again, I want to emphasize that some of this is already in your zoning ordinance. So I don't know how. So I'll leave it at that, and you can talk more about those. So before I move on, any questions, thoughts? Am I making sense? So I already kind of talked about this, but I'll hit it a little bit more. It's good to hear it a couple times to help it sink in. Conventional zoning, again, this is what most communities have. This is what some of your ordinances still developed in this way. Focuses primarily on separating land uses. Typical zoning does not consider the importance of design, does not conveniently allow the mix of land uses. It can allow a mix of land uses. Your current zoning ordinance allows a mix of land uses, but there are still extra steps that sometimes you have to take, and that might be something that we want to address. If you notice on that list I gave you, the principal permitted uses and conditional uses, there's different shapes. There's a square and a square and a diamond. Well, the square is uses permitted by right, so those are uses that if someone, meet the minimum setback standards and so on and so forth, the village has to approve. Use permitted by right, you don't have discretion. The diamond requires another step. Those are special land uses. And so those are uses that if developer wants to do that, they have to go in front of the planning commission and the village council, they have to get a public hearing. It goes to planning commission's recommendation, the village council does the final approval, and maybe it's up to you guys, but maybe you don't want to put a prospective developer in your community through this additional step. This additional step, you know, when you have to go through site plan or conditional land use approval and then site plan approval on top of it, you know, you're probably adding 3 to 4 months of the process. So if you were to just go through site plan approval without needing a conditional land use, you're probably looking, I can't say I don't know your community exactly, but I've been doing this for a long time, so I kind of get the gist on how these go. Typical site plan is anywhere from 3 to 4 months from start to finish. Site plan with conditional land use is easily 6 months from start to finish. You don't want to believe that, but that's generally what it is. So if nothing else, if you know, as we get into this and you're working with Zach and me, and you determine, you know what, these standards are pretty good. These hit a lot of the highlights of what a form-based code is. Well, maybe we look at that list and change some of those things from conditional to permitted, if that's what the community wants to do, and maybe even adds a few to that list, because there's still some exemptions I looked at and I wasn't quite sure why they were not allowed in the downtown area. So what else? So typical of conventional zoning, does not conventional allow mixed uses. Hope you don't mind if I kind of go off this little chain. I forget where I was. Does not address the desired form of the downtown area. So there's a form, you know, like I said, there's a minimum setback. There's not probably a whole lot else. Form-based code tries to address that. And again, the outcomes are not predictable, as I mentioned in the last slide. So a really good, if you can picture what we're trying to represent on this slide, that these boxes are really represent the effort or the emphasis, probably a better word. So these boxes represent the emphasis of a typical zoning ordinance. It says Euclidean zoning ordinance. Someone could get bonus points if they tell me why it's Euclidean.
I do. Euclid, Ohio is why, not Euclid the mathematician, which would make more sense. But that's where zoning comes from in the kind of turn of the century-ish, 1920 or so. Euclid had a housing developer who wanted to put housing, I can't remember where, but it essentially came down to separating, you know, factories from houses. So you couldn't build your house right next to this, you know, giant industrial complex. So to separate them that way, and that's where the short of it, we get Euclidean zoning.
That's from Euclid, Ohio, yeah. And that ended up being the U.S. Supreme Court case that validated zoning throughout the whole United States. So before this case, Euclid versus Amber Realty, zoning was challenged all the time. And then the community said, you can't, we have private property rights, you can't build. And then that case came along, the U.S. Supreme Court decided it. So if you're ever in a meeting and a resident says what you're doing is unconstitutional or isn't allowed, that's not true. It's been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is a kind of emphasis. And so as you see from this slide, the blue square is, so this is traditional zoning, is use. Okay, that's as we talked about. That's like industrial, residential, commercial, office. Never those groups shall ever come together. And traditionally, they're all separate. There's a whole idea of zoning. And then there's the middle part, management. That's what we have to do regardless. You have your zoning administrator, you have Ryan, you have the planning commission, and you have village council, and you guys all do what you do in your site plans. And then the little rectangle in the corner is how it all looks at the end. And as we've seen in some suburban locations, how it all looks in the end isn't that great. And so But this is kind of how we do zoning now. It's very use heavy, use oriented. So then we get into this kind of emphasis or effort in a form-based code, and it's more what is the final product going to look like, how's it going to function, how's it going to relate to your sidewalk, how's it going to relate to people walking, how's it going to relate to people who are window shopping, you know, all the things that people kind of do in traditional downtowns. You know, traditional downtowns don't have 15 rows of parking before the front door. You know, traditional downtowns have a door as the front door, and parking is in the back or on the street or who knows where. A lot of those traditional downtowns work very well without a ton of parking. I live in one of them. City of Plymouth doesn't have a lot of downtown parking. Has a very vibrant downtown. I live right downtown. Every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, there's people parked in front of my house. Now, do I love that people are parked in front of my house? No, but it's part of buying into downtown Plymouth. They just know it's going to happen, and that's part of the people park there and they walk to downtown. So, not saying parking is not important. It is important, and your business people will really think it's important, and it is. However, in the downtown situation, you have to sort of understand that. And so this, kind of back to this slide and kind of that idea, is heavy on the form. How's it going to work? How's it going to function? Management's the same. Still got to administer it. Doesn't matter if it's a form-based or a typical zoning. It's still planning commission, road council, Brian, zoning administrator, all that sort of thing. And then the use density is maybe not as small as that last one in the form, but it's much less. It's much less emphasized how your ordinance and how that district will function. So, as I said before, how do you think this will? What do you think this would do or encourage in an area that had a form-based code? It's going to, I'll answer the question, it's going to encourage people to want to develop within your community in those areas because they are not going to be so constrained by development rules and regulations, zoning regulations. There's still regulations, but not as many. The idea, while there are design standards and things like that, it would make it easier for people to come here and not have to have a trip for a site plan, a trip for a special land use, a trip for 15 variances, you know, a trip for whatever, and hopefully get people into the community while still coming up with something that everyone's very proud of. Talk a little bit about this. So, what are some of the applications? There's a lot of applications. I just go over some of them here. Form-based code uses build two lines. We talked about that. So minimum setbacks. It's kind of maximum setback. It's supposed to be somewhat close to the road. Build two lines do not permit deviations except for specific conditions such as porches or patios. Build two lines regulate consistency and distance from the right. There's some architectural design issues. Emphasize the detail on facades from the public street. Yeah, it's a human scale. When you have a sea of parking in front of a building, there's no human scale. It brings, as they fuse the inside and outside, it kind of brings both the inside and outside of the building together. And it improves communication by setting standards for sign location, building interest. So everyone kind of knows exactly what the community wants going in. We're not sitting in a planning commission meeting and planning commission commissioners, build council starts peppering them about what's the code of the building, what kind of shingles it is, what kind of windows. Well, I don't know, you guys do that. Anyway, this is up front rather than kind of get hit in the back end. So it's predictable. We use physical rather than separation of uses. And it's not necessarily design guidelines, but has adopted regulations that are design oriented. So these are, I think it's, no, a few more. So the big picture, more graphics, less words, can be approved citywide or just in certain districts or places as we have to talk about a little bit, or maybe get your input on. Combines design and zoning in one code rather than having a design code and zoning. So this is one of the things that I want to ask you guys about. So here's one of the questions. Should a true form-based code be adopted for the entire village? As I said, probably not. Administration can be cumbersome if design controls are complicated, particularly in residential areas. Some neighborhoods in industrial areas may not benefit. If you've already got an established industrial area, established residential areas, there's really not the point to it. We recommend starting where areas are lively with pedestrian use, like a downtown, and where that's important, or where you want to promote that sort of thing. And as noted, the downtown district employs some of the form-based, as in your downtown, currently does employ some of these tenants. But again, they're kind of sprinkled in several different sections, where if we were to really go in this direction and really hammer this a little harder than it is in the current ordinance, we kind of bring that all together. Maybe even call it the downtown form-based, form-based downtown or downtown code or something. We'd come up with some sort. So, some questions. And I provided you a zoning map to kind of take a look at where these districts currently are and where you might want to emphasize this kind of concept. Right in the center of the village, obviously, we've got the downtown area, radiating out along Mill Street and South Street. We've got the Gateway area, and along M15, we've got your M15 corridor commercial area. These areas, I don't want to lead you, and I don't really, and actually I don't need your definitive answers tonight because this process is going on for the next, till we're shooting for November. Yeah, November, December. But we've got a little time for you guys to let this kind of soak in and think about it. But if I'm looking at your zoning map, that kind of, it's not really a ring, but it's, I guess, sort of a triangle. It's a triangle, so sort of a triangle. Mill, South Street, M15, that's sort of a area, where, particularly on those roadways, that this kind of concept would probably work well for promoting new development and limiting some of the administrative parts to this kind of thing. So the questions, as you look at that zoning map and think about this, should the village de-emphasize land use categories that be more permissive in the downtown district beyond the current structure? And this is the current structure, this little blue sheet from your zoning ordinance, that's the current structure. So as you work with Zach, as maybe we discuss a little bit tonight, and you look at these uses, are there some of those uses in that very left-hand column that you think would be appropriate in a downtown form-based code district? And what about some of these other areas that I mentioned, or maybe that you have thoughts about?
Excuse me, Doug?
Yeah.
With the village is, currently it's a historic area. I don't think it's defined as like a historic way through there, but with the form-based, how does that help maintain that historic look of the village? Does that put more emphasis on to the planning commission or ability to do something with the developer if they're going to redo a building are we able to emphasize more of the historical look versus just plain old brick and
Yeah, there's features that you would choose as part of this process that the developer would know this up front, that would be incorporated into new development or redevelopment. So yeah, part of that initial survey of your community, what you like, what you don't like, that could then be employed for future development. So yeah, the answer, yes, I think it would help. It would help that rather than just getting Rite Aid, show up on.
so would it, if they were doing something, a redevelopment in that area and they wanted to make it a pink building or fluorescent green or whatever, does that form base put it back to the planning commission with a little bit of clout to keep it in line with traditionally with the rest of the buildings?
Yeah, I think that I've seen them with a palette of colors that are acceptable. So that would be part of the discussion if you do want to embark upon this. Is go through the survey, what you like, what you don't like, what are the kind of general palettes of color. Now, of course, then there's always some exceptions that the community can grant. It's not that you're trying to be so prescriptive in every single instance. However, the form-based code will let the developer know right up front what you're thinking.
Thank you.
I have
Yes.
a question. Can you confirm that form-based code for the downtown will help prevent significant deviations from an accepted site plan? And I'll give you an example that we actually had. Out on Horizon 15, there was a building was going to be built as a hardware store. The initial site plan showed all these windows along the front. When they actually built it, there were no windows. They decided that they didn't want to put them in, and there was nothing we could do because it was, the old Euclidean style, use-based. Will form-based help prevent that sort of issue from happening?
Well, your current ordinance should have prevented that from happening, but depending on what your current ordinance requires. However, there's more building design emphasis in a form-based code, and that would become part of the approved site plan. So that would allow, and the reason I say your current ordinance should have helped that situation is an approved site plan has the same effect as your zoning ordinance. And so if a facade of a building was shown in a certain way and that's what the community approved, that has the same effect. They can't alter that. It'd be a zoning violation, a site plan violation. However, form-based code that had very specific standards would even emphasize that more. You have a better chance of doing it. So part of that is enforcement. I know the community I work in, we just had a building that came in and the community approved it a certain way. They came in and pulled building permits. They notified me because they thought it looked a little different. We found out it did look, and this is not a form-based code, this is just regular. They moved some windows, they moved the drive-through. We made them, not back to the planning commission, but we made them provide a little more explanation of what they're doing. It turned out to make sense, but an approved site plan does have a lot of, you've got some leverage with a fully approved site plan, as long as the elevation view is part of the approved site plan. However, form-based code would be even more, I think it would provide more protection.
Thank you.
Thoughts, questions? Well, I already talked about, should we consider expansion to other parts of the village? And then the last one, that Ryan tells me some good news about the possibility of sanitary sewer within the village. So we have to kind of start thinking about, maybe somebody thinks it's good, maybe somebody don't think it's good. I don't know, but don't want to get into that. But if it were to pass, and there was actually municipal sewer available within the downtown area and elsewhere within the village. Things could change here. This could become easily a desirable location for new development. Because right now, on septic and well, let's face it, the Oakland County Health Department is not allowing any restaurants on septic and well. And or any kind of substantial development at all, anywhere. So, as Ryan, words you use, we're a game changer. If the village gets municipal sewer and water, you want to be ready. You want to be ready for those folks that want to come here and do things within your downtown, do things outside of the downtown that they can't now because of the constraints of having just septic systems. So that's another reason why this is this kind of thing. Whether you want to go full-blown form-based code or not, doing what you're doing, updating your zoning ordinance, just adopted a master plan, even if all we do is kind of re-emphasize the concepts that are currently in your zoning ordinance and maybe open up some of these mixed uses a little bit, you're on the right track. You're doing the right things. You're taking these steps. You know, it's very likely that you will see additional development in this community for the next 10 years. So, and then the last, we've got another topic to talk about, but I know there's a lot of information, and it's a little confusing. It's sometimes a little confusing to me, this topic, because this is a very flexible approach to zoning. There's a lot of different directions you can go. Your current ordinance sort of took what's called sort of a hybrid approach, where it's got some traditional zoning in it, it's got some form-based stuff in it. It's kind of like this hybrid of both. So we have to start thinking, do we like this hybrid approach? Or do we want to really move more towards form-based? We don't know if they have an answer tonight. I don't expect they have an answer tonight. And how do you want to proceed? I will, Zach and I will talk when I'm done, and I'm sure we'll be looking for additional input from you guys in the next, next 2 weeks. I think he has a meeting with you guys coming up, hasn't he?
Back in September, isn't it?
Yeah. So in September. So think about that. Any thoughts? Any thoughts?
I have a question.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, I don't know something, but is this map exactly what currently is the zoning for us, or is this?
No, that's your current zoning.
Actually, I would like to point out we did rezone the one piece of the public property that was here because the school sold that property and we had to rezone it so that they could do something other than a school or public use. So I know at least that one piece has been rezoned.
Yes.
Well,
This is from 11.
Yeah, this is from
Well,
2000.
the reason I'm inquiring too is the house at Church Street and Mall Street, that used to be 3 lots, and they didn't combine those until the house started getting built. I'm just looking at dates. I look at dates on everything, and this says it was 2011. That house was only built 3 or 4 years ago, so.
I pulled this off your website, so
Yeah.
it's whatever's on your website. So
Okay.
if we, it could very well be.
There's always something, just like a budget. As soon as you adopt it, something changes the next day, and then
But generally speaking,
10 years to do that.
yes, that's the current zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say probably 90% of that's or more is correct.
Okay, I have some input. Speaking of this map and the 2 public sections here, they were zoned public because they already had existing school property and public library on them. As was mentioned, the school did close the one school building and sold it, so that had to be rezoned before it could be developed at all. Would it make sense to maybe just rezone both of those to different types of zones and just eliminate the public and instead adjust the uses to allow the uses for the public schools in those areas?
So say that again.
Yeah, would it make sense to like, and I'll give an example here, is on this side, this is currently a school. If they ever did close that school and wanted to sell that property, right now, it being zoned public, it can't be redeveloped for anything other than public use. Would it make sense to maybe rezone that as, actually, for example, R1, and that would allow future different use for it, although the existing school would of course be grandfathered in initially and maybe make adjustments if needed to allow public education facilities in other zones.
Yeah, so did I hear some talk, has some of this already happened?
Yeah, this school was, you're definitely right, Larry, that it's the M15 commercial, corridor commercial.
Yeah, the one on that's west of South Street.
Yeah.
But we also have that big chunk that's east of South Street too that we could consider rezoning to something different.
I am not sure of the definition of public. I mean, it definitely does include school, but if there's another way to draw it up. We've also been talking about future land use and the need to, when those things do change, we want to be able to say, we want that to become, or remain a civic institution or anything like that.
So that would be, so in a perfect world, your newly adopted master plan, I don't have it here in front of me, but should have anticipated this question, and those properties should be shown as something future. I don't know if they are or not, but we'll look into that. And so typically a community will follow what their master plan says, and it might be something other than public. Now, I will also say this, you talk about the school being grandfathered, it wouldn't matter because schools can go anywhere, they don't need zoning. They can go, public schools are exempt from local zoning. So they in theory could go in any district. And they don't, in fact, they don't even need site plan approval. They can go anywhere and free of the if they want. So that could be zoned to anything in a school.
Okay. So in that case, the lines here that define where you can put public schools and things don't even apply.
It really doesn't. The zoning still applies to private schools. That is not exempt. This is one of those exemptions from local zoning. So there's a number of exemptions, state and federal, and attorney general opinions that have occurred over the years. Public schools are one of those exemptions that occurred, let's see, 1990 or something, maybe 92. Didn't used to be. Public schools used to have to go through the whole process. And there's
Well, we probably haven't really changed some of those since before 92.
So, yes, good question, good point. Schools wouldn't be impacted if we rezoned it to something else. So now would be the time, as we're kind of going through this process, and you just adopted a master plan. Now's the time to start thinking about that.
Just a straw poll, are we interested in, no pressure, but are we thinking form-based code beyond the downtown district, or is that something we're interested in? Yeah.
I would like to at least see a hybrid approach maybe along the M15 corridor, especially focusing on new construction to make it consistent with the existing buildings.
All right, great. And then what about, I'll follow Brian's lead, how about a straw poll on, instead of these concepts sort of being sprinkled around the ordinance in the downtown area, are we kind of looking towards a more formalized form-based code within the downtown?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Actually, I was on the planning commission when the previous zoning was redone, and I thought we were going that way for the downtown. It seems we only got part way there. So I certainly am in favor of getting the rest of the way there for the downtown here, so we can really help hold that character of our village.
All right, good. Excellent. Okay, feel free to, if you have any questions, of course you can contact me directly. You can get any questions through Ryan, and I'll be happy to try to answer them. If you think of some great thing tonight that you're about to know, which I do sometimes.
Right.
I have my 3 a.m. list, and I sit there in bed, and all of a sudden I'm like, I can't sleep, and all of a sudden something comes in my head. That's my 3 a.m. anybody know, does this ring a bell? Is anyone familiar with this idea? Probably been to some MAP trainings and things like that.
Yeah, and also part of that is conservation development.
Yeah, kind of clustered projects.
Clusters so that you leave some area that can be communal area while still having the same number of, often having the same number of houses, just smaller yards and such.
Yeah, PUDs are great for that sort of thing, for clustering projects, where you leave open space, so you're not just having, lots from east to west, north to south, and there's no yard or open space. So PUD is planning and development, and it's another form of flexible, it's another tool, I think I have a slide that says this. It's another tool in the toolbox, and it's a good tool because it allows a prospective property owner, developer to come to your community with maybe an idea that doesn't quite fit in your current zoning, even in a form-based code. So something that just doesn't quite fit. And that can be a land use, that can be a building type, it can be a mixture of building types. As I said, a lot of your current zoning and traditional zoning doesn't really like when things are put together. Well, PUDs, planning and development, was first established the name, planned unit development, was established to bring a bunch of different uses together. Like a shopping center, and some apartments, and some offices, and you do that kind of like we're talking about with form-based, but it brings it all into one, but it's project specific, where a form-based code is a whole district. We're talking about a single property, a single project that comes before the village. There actually is a section in Public Act 110, which is the Zoning Enabling Act, that talks about PUDs. So if you're ever interested, if it's 3 a.m. and you can't go to sleep, Google Public Act 110 and you'll run across about a paragraph or maybe a paragraph and a half. It's not a lot of information in the PUD section, but it talks about PUDs. So this is one of those things that the enabling legislation allows us to do. The enabling legislation allows us to have planning and developments. The community doesn't have to have them. You don't. A lot of communities don't. Some communities do. And it's, again, I like to say it's just another tool that you guys can use if you have, particularly helpful if you have some odd circumstances. And I'll tell you why, well, I'll tell you why in a second. So this kind of goes to the comment about clustering. Planning developments may provide flexibility in many situations, allows a mixture of land uses and densities. Flexibility is granted if the applicant does certain things for the community. That's key. May include agreements, conditions of approval to ensure timing and compliance. It's almost like a contract. We don't really allow contract zoning in Michigan, but it's almost contract zoning because the project is built, and that's the once it's approved on a piece of property, that's all that can happen on the property is that PUD, and they have to build it per plan. There's usually a detailed development agreement that goes along with the plan, so everybody knows whose responsibility to do what and to do what. It's a great tool for a developer because he can do things that might not otherwise be permitted. It's good for the community because usually the community gets something out of a planned unit development. Some that might just be additional open space. It could be contributions to your fire department. It could be contributions to the path system. It could be contributions to other things that they have to have a relationship to the development. You can't just ask for money, but they have to. You can get benefits. The community can ask for benefits. The developer can propose benefits to get something maybe a little out of the ordinary, but those benefits benefits have to be somewhat related to the project. You can't just say, I mean, fire truck. So you can't pay for, in essence, you can't pay for an approval. But if they're, if they're proposing 100 apartment units, and you know that you guys need, to cover 100 new apartment units, you guys need another sheriff, they might be able to help offset the cost of the sheriff. So that's the kind of thing that you can ask for or get as part of the planning and development. It allows a little give and take between a developer and a community, where if it's just if someone is proposing a site plan that's per ordinance standards and they meet all of those ordinance standards, you have no discretion. A PUD is very discretionary. It's really a negotiation between the developer and the community. So as I kind of alluded to, some of the benefits of a planned unit development, it allows for the consideration of waiving parts of your current zoning ordinance for development that might not otherwise be feasible. Typically, these are things like setbacks. Like, say someone wants to build a commercial building and they want to build it closer to the side or front or rear. Instead of making them go through a site plan and a variance, it's all baked into the PUD plan. So it's all one process. And that could also include zoning. So let's say someone wants to build a commercial building with residential on the second floor, commercial on the front floor. You probably don't have too many zoning ordinances that would allow that provisions. So PUD would allow that sort of thing, this mixture of uses. And maybe that building is going to be too close to the front setback, too close to the side setbacks, based on the current ordinance provisions. A PUD could accommodate all of those kind of irregularities without making a developer do these steps. So in that case that I just mentioned, property, say, is zone residential. Someone wants to do something, there's a little commercial on the first floor, residential on the second floor. Let's say it's in a perfectly logical location for this. I'm not saying it would be in the middle of the neighborhood. Let's say it's up in your main corridors. To allow something like that to occur, they would need a rezoning, they would need variances, they would need a site plan approval, it might be a special land use. So they could go through potentially 4 separate processes that would take months and months and months. A planned unit development allows all of those things to be incorporated into one process, where it's site plan, rezoning, variances, special land use, all put together. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a quick process. PUDs, because they are complex, will take longer than a site plan, but they will be less, much less, than a site plan, a conditional use, variances, and a rezoning. So, again, it kind of helps streamline the process. It's a great tool. I use it in most of the things I work in. Big part of this is the second bullet. It allows for the development of public benefit. So there's the developer typically is one of the criteria to get a PUD approved. The developer has to show what's the community has to be solid for this. What's the public benefit? And so that's where we get into, I'm going to be having more open space, and my project will actually preserve 40% of the site. It's going to look just like it did now. That could be construed as a public benefit. We're going to extend sewer. Let's say when you do get sewer, we will pay for the extension of sewer from this point to this point. Yes, it will benefit my project, but it will also benefit all the schools around. I'm just thinking of things that I've seen. We will pave a road. There's a certain road that needs paving that is in some relationship to my development. We'll pave part of the road. We will make a contribution to your fire department, make a contribution to the sheriff's department, make a contribution to your tax program, whatever that happens to be. So, and then, those public benefits have to be listed. Those have to be known to the community. This is something that the applicant is required to do. They're not just going to get their development. They can't do these things. These are things that a developer is required to do. And as I mentioned before, it's discretionary, so this is kind of a negotiation between the developer and the community. It's not a use permit by right. It's not a conditional use, not a rezoning. It's rezoning, but it's it's discretionary. You guys have a lot of control, and I like it. Now, I will say the downside of PUD, if you've ever been to a community that's growing fast, let's say Independence Township a few years ago, Rochester Hills, there's, I'm guessing, a lot of PUDs. And sometimes residents get a little unhappy with PUDs because they think it's a way, some people will say a PUD is a way to get around your current standards. It's a way to skirt the zoning, because in a PUD you're pretty much open to do almost anything you want to do. Now your ordinance can tailor that to a certain amount, but generally speaking, that's the deal. So just so you know, there are some downsides, and those downsides will be brought up to you by your residents, that they're only doing a PUD because they're getting around the rules. Now, you don't want that to happen. You don't want your community to get a reputation, because some communities do. I've worked in communities where planning commission, there's a PUD, there's a PUD, there's a PUD, and they've got all these PUDs, and it does, I don't want to say it definitely turns out to be you're skirting the ordinance, but it can be viewed like that. The control is in your hands. The control's in the planning commission's hands, the control's in the village council's hands, and if you have a properly written PUD ordinance, all of those discretionary standards are at your disposal. If you don't think those are being met, you don't have to approve it. This is really up to the community. This is one of those kinds of ordinances that the planning commission and the elected officials, village council, has to really do their homework. You are presented a PUD plan. Of course, you'll have, maybe not us, but you'll have a planner, you'll have your planner review your PUD plan. Hopefully that planner will go through all of the standards of your PUD ordinance, the discretionary standards, yes, it needs this, it needs this, it needs this, and then present to the planning commission, here are the public benefits that the applicant is proposing. You guys have to agree to that. During that process, you don't think you don't agree with it, then you have the discretion not to approve it. So it's a great tool. It can be a little, it can be misused sometimes. I just want to let you guys know that. But I recommend the use of planning developments, and I recommend that you have it in your zoning ordinance. I kind of start off, it's a tool in the toolbox. You know, why wouldn't you take advantage of everything that they do in legislation?
It becomes the Pat Benatar approach. It's hit me with your best shot.
Yeah.
So people can bring ideas to us. Phil Donahue, Pat Benatar, we're about the same era. So it becomes a good option that if somebody wants to do it, they can approach the village with it. It's up to us to approve it or not, but it's an idea.
Yeah. And usually with PUDs, there's a pretty lengthy or pretty significant pre-application process, so that the developer doesn't get too far before, like if they come to you with some kind of idea and it's just that ain't gonna fly here, they want to know that it's not gonna fly. And so typically we will, in our ordinances we write, we'll have a pretty significant pre-application meeting requirement that might require a planning commission and maybe a member of the village council. Ryan, like village manager, others, your planner, we all kind of sit around, yeah, this is gonna work, no, that's not gonna work. At least give them some ideas of how it might go before they invest a lot of time and money. The downside of PUDs for a developer is that it's all of those things wrapped in one, so their plan has to be pretty comprehensive right off the bat, where if they're just going for a rezoning and they got not a whole lot of money invested in a rezoning. It's an application and a legal description, where a PUD, you've got some pretty significant detail, even at the preliminary stage that they have to provide. So that's a little bit of a downside. The other downside for a developer is that once something gets approved as a PUD, That's all that can happen on that property. So if that project goes belly up, that property is kind of stuck in that approved plan. Now, a new owner could pick that up and build what was approved, that'd be perfectly fine. Or if someone had a different idea, they just have to go through a rezone. They have to rezone the property out of that PUD designation. So that's possible. So there are some, I think it's a good tool. It takes work on your part. It's going to take work on the planning commission, village council to make sure you guys are in charge. And, but it's a good tool. So, yep.
So along M15, as sewers went in, they would be allowed to have multiple entrances onto M15, or PUDs would start eliminating that. You could have 3 or 4 businesses with one entrance onto M15 for all those businesses, correct?
Well, maybe that's part of your public benefit. Maybe they eliminate some of those. If they're redeveloping property, and that's what you guys want to do, maybe that's something they would offer the community. Or you also want to address that with some access management standards, separate from PUD.
Master plan has them.
What's that?
We left them in the master plan, some access management.
Yeah, which would dictate that.
Hey Doug,
Yeah.
when you're talking about public benefits as part of the deal of a PUD, who proposes the benefits? Is it the developer or is it the community?
The developer will come to you first, but the community can help that discussion. It's not like a conditional. Do you guys do conditional rezoning, which is a little different? I don't even want to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that. That's part of the negotiation. Is the public benefit grant.
So the reason I asked is if it came from the developer, it would seem more like a bribe to get approval than it would be something that if it came from the community, they said, well, these are the 16 things we want to do, maybe you can help us with this.
Well, we would, again, you guys have to agree to it. And I'm rewriting a PUD ordinance right now. For public benefit, it's a good question because this is always kind of a murky part of a PUD ordinance. What is public benefit? Is it just open space? Is it better landscaping? Is it better architecture that you wouldn't normally get? Yeah, maybe. Those could all be public benefit. But the ordinance I'm rewriting right now, the planning commission wanted the public benefits very specific. And so we're actually giving a developer, they can still be general, but we're actually giving them 5 or 6 choices that we want to guide them for. It's like, okay, you can tell us that your building architecture is so great that should be considered a public benefit. We're not so sure. We agree with that. But here's 5 things that we really think are important to us. And if you pick, like you said, if you pick a couple of these things off this list, yeah, we would consider that a public benefit. And really, developers want to know. Developers don't want to go into this blind and just be guessing what the community's public benefit. Good question. That's a huge issue. Sometimes the planning commission agrees. Sometimes the council might not agree. And I've worked on a PUD that made it all through planning commission. Got to, in this case it was a township, got to the township board, the planning commission thought it was the greatest plan ever. Thought it had great public benefit. Got to the township board denied it because it didn't have enough public benefit. Just denied it. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but that can happen. That's a very it's kind of, I don't want to say controversial, but it's always what is public benefit. So what's in a PUD ordinance? It's similar to other zoning parts of your zoning ordinance. Where is it permitted? And this is where you guys can kind of control where you're going to have. You don't have to allow PUDs everywhere. You can allow them in certain parts of a community, or you can allow them everywhere. It really depends on how you want to do it. But where is a PUD permitted? What kind of uses might you allow? There's some ordinances that are very permissive that just say every use in the zoning ordinance is permitted in a PUD. In some communities that say, here's a list of 6 or 7 uses that would be permitted as part of a PUD. So again, these are kind of dials. I think when I think of a zoning ordinance, I sometimes think of dials that you turn. And so it's really going to be up to you guys to let us know how far you want to turn the dials. Like, when you're in the community, do you want PUDs? Do you want it in the whole community, or do you just want it along the 15 court? You know, what uses? Do you want everything? Do you want the dial all the way to 10 for every use permitted in the community, or maybe just a few? Maybe just a lot of PUDs. So that's when you're talking to Zach, you're talking to me, how far you want to go with this stuff.
That seems like you have multiple dials, because if you dial up one, that would affect the other one, would dial back some on some other aspect, it seems like. So, I don't know, kind of a juggling system.
Could be.
Chemistry.
That too.
Just right.
And then qualifications is huge. So in the general provisions of the PUD, this is where the planning commission, village council determines if this project qualifies. Does it have public benefit? Is it going to be beneficial to the community? Does it do all of these things? You know, does it meet whatever qualifications you come up with? That should be done right out of the standards. There's going to be some design considerations. There's going to be some density considerations. Residential, mixed use, non-residential, all of those kind of typical things. This is an eye test. Sorry about that. These are other parts, typical parts of the PUD ordinance. This is just, application, how it's going through, what kind of site plan requirements, what's required at the preliminary and final stages, what kind of conditions would you place on it. It should be a PUD development agreement, and then what happens if a PUD is modified at the end of the process, or maybe 2 years after it's approved. There should be a whole process on that. So there's no trying to avoid unknowns here. But a really key one here is the first line you're going to have to read. It says rezoning or special land use. So this is a key part to how you want to proceed with the PUD. PUD can be a zoning classification. So PUD could show up on a map. That's the zoning. It's at the end of a PUD process. It's zoned actually. Designated area map will show up as PUD. And then the applicant can't do anything in that zoning district hasn't been approved on that site plan. That goes through an entire process. Because it's a rezoning, it has to have a public hearing at the village council. So there has to be planning commission, village council approval. The other way that a PUD approval process can go is it can be a special land use. So special land use ultimately ends up being the same thing, but instead of a rezoning, they don't have to rezone to a designation called PUD. The underlying zoning would still be there, but it would be a special land use. They still could only do what's on that plan. Special land use. Why I'm even raising this issue, one, you gotta pick which way you want to do it. The state law says you can do it either way. But if you were to choose doing this as a special land use, and couple that with special land uses only being reviewed at the planning commission, this would eliminate a step for the developer. If you're interested in streamlining things to a certain degree, the special land use process would be a shorter process than if you were making your PUD or rezoning. That's kind of a in the weeds topic, discussion item, but it's something to think about. And Ryan, we'll probably talk more about that. But that's kind of a technical issue, and it would allow a slightly shorter administrative process, administrative review process, if you were to go special land use versus the ultimate, it would be the product would be the same. But state law allows you to go either direction. And that's really the presentation. So you got me here. Any questions? Let's start with PUDs. Any questions on PUDs? Have you guys? Yes.
So over in Ann Arbor someplace, there's what you call an intentional community. I think it's called Sunrise. Something like that.
That's in one of the communities I represent, Scioto Township.
Yeah. So there, people choose to live in this particular way. They have small kind of apartments. All of the like 2 rows, and all of the front doors face this courtyard. And then they have community gardens. They have a clubhouse, sort of, which is also a kitchen and dining room and that, and schoolrooms. So I don't know if they have goat pens and chicken pens or not, but they probably could.
They do.
So is that an example of a PUD?
Yeah, I believe they did that. I'll have to look, but I believe they did that.
Yeah.
Because it didn't quite meet. It's different. It's not your typical condo project.
Right. Very different.
Yeah, there's a community dining hall that everyone comes together for a weekly meal.
And they take turns cooking too.
Yeah.
Or they can cook in their own little kitchen too.
Yeah, it's co-house. It's a we call it co-housing. It's a co-housing.
Right.
Yeah, that's in a community I've worked in for 9 years. It's in Scioto Township.
I tried to talk my wife into moving there. That's really
Yeah, but I think that's a good example of an idea that wouldn't quite fit in any typical district because it's not really an apartment, it's not really a condo. It's got parts that just didn't work, just didn't come together. You know, they didn't want they wanted all their parking away from the units, so there's no parking near the units. So it's a little inconvenient, but you know that's what they want. You have to park like off to the side, and then you have to walk to your unit. So the fire department had to get involved because okay, how are we going to fight a fire if there's no road between these units? So the fire department it's a sidewalk, but it's a little wider than a normal sidewalk, made of a little more heavy-duty material, and yeah. So, but yeah, that'd be a good example. Yeah. So some oddities. PUDs are great for addressing that. Any other ideas? Ryan is looking.
Trying to think. We went through my list already, so.
Yeah. Anybody else? Does this sound? No, we'll do a straw poll with this. Does this sound desirable? Does this sound like something you at least don't just want to? Well, let's start there. Does this sound like something you might want to add as we're working on your zoning ordinance? Is this another, again, tool in the toolbox that you might want to think about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you get into it, I'll report that back to Zach. As you get into this, you know, you don't have to adopt it. You're going to see it, we'll review it, we'll talk about it. And it's not something you're comfortable with. We're not near adopting it. So we'll put that on the list that will.
Isn't McDonald's a simple PUD up on 15 in the township?
I don't know. McDonald's predates my time at Brandon.
But it has the nursery school and a business on the same lot with one entrance.
It could be. You know, I can look into that.
Just curious.
Yeah, that was there before I started. Brandon has a couple of PUDs. I think there's a couple of residential PUDs for the community. Used to be more. The recession of 2008. A lot of development. Brandon is sort of granted, it was the next thing after Independence Township, it was coming up that way. And then when that recession, it just stopped. Still stopped. Not a lot of construction development. But that's another story. So PUDs looks like we're going for that. Good, good. Any other questions? You got me here. I don't like to use the word expert, but I've been doing planning for 30 years. Any other topics? Anything you want to throw my way?
I'll throw something out. This is partly for you, partly for the planning commission to take in consideration. I notice right now our natural preserve area that single-family dwelling is listed as a primary use as well as kennel as a special use. And I'm just wanted to raise that point because I don't think either of those uses would be appropriate for our current natural preserve area. So I just wanted to raise that point so that could be, have some follow-up done on that.
Kennels in there too.
Yes, I said that. Single family and also accessory buildings, but I could see that there could be some structures that might be useful for public purposes.
Pavilions.
Any other thoughts, questions, ideas?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very informative.
All right.
Very nice. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, let's move on to the Heritage Park Design
Actually,
Report.
can I say one more thing? In your packet, you'll see a couple sections of the zoning ordinance that have already been reviewed by the planning commission. So there's, call it 10 different pieces that we're working our way through, and these are the first couple that have been discussed and more or less approved. They're kind of in process still, but these ones are very much approaching the finish line. The whole project, like Doug said, November, December-ish, we're hoping to be completed, but the stuff tonight was another sizable chunk. So talking about downtown and form-based code, and that's another piece. So we're working our way through several things kind of all at once, but these are the ones we're just about there on. So they're there for your review. We can, if you have questions, probably ask me or Doug or Zach if he stops by, but there you go. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Because we did have a very lengthy meeting to make it through, I forget what chapters
It
and
was
all that.
definitions was the one we
Yeah,
spent
yeah, I think it was-
several hours on.
I think it was 3 hours to get through that.
Just definitions.
All right, back to the Heritage Park Design Report. I don't know who's, you have the reports, I believe, the programs, the design of all of that.
I can speak to it if you want to.
Or Patty.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm going to this evening.
And Matt too. So your packet has the Heritage Garden Park Green Space Area Space design in it. It was presented to the Village Council at their last meeting in July by Ron Campbell, the architect from Oakland County, who is fantastic. It was a team effort. So members of the Planning Commission, DDA, Village Council, all contributed in huge ways, as well as members of the public, and lots of good input and thoughts into that design. You'll see it's not a, we want to snap our fingers and make that happen tomorrow kind of plan. It's lots of phases, lots of time, but be working towards that. So as that area is used in the future, this gives us a track to run on. You guys want to add anything to it? Matt or Patty or Melanie?
Very comprehensive. That's a great job.
And Ron is great to work with. He's a nice man to work with. So that's what we love from him.
Yeah, he's really on top of this stuff.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a very professional looking and a great plan. It sure be nice to see that soon, but
implementation,
I'm sure that'll be difficult.
and maybe donate some money.
Yeah, just one take I took off that, Bob, in relation to what you just said is, yeah, it's nice as a plan for maybe future vision. My take on it, though, when I started adding everything up, is it looks like the total is so far $150-some thousand and growing because there's a lot of TBDs. And I know how our village budget is, so I think it's something that we'll have to definitely take in, as Ryan said, little baby steps and phases over many years before we can eventually get towards that.
The good thing is there's some good, intelligent members on that board that are grant hunters and looking for money all the time. And I'm sure that's where it's going to get pulled off, the primary part of it.
And at the same time, I also think it's really important, though, in something like that, when you can only take small pieces, to have that future vision where you want to be, because that way you can make sure that the little things you do today will fit into that vision down the road, too. So I think it's really good to have a vision like that to follow.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, I'll leave the training plan up to you, Ryan. It's first I'd seen it.
Yeah, I threw it in there for you.
I know.
But it's one that pertains to everybody, so that's why I wanted to bring it up today. Everybody knows about the RRC process, right? The Redevelopment Ready Communities through MEDC. Your digital packet, so if you go to Documents on Demand, you'll see the digital packet has the full RRC, best practices and training, all of it's in there. But we just printed the one page for you that talks about training strategy. It's one we've never really had in the village. So best practice 4.6 speaks to having a training strategy. We do training and education for our boards and commissions and village council in several different ways. But our planner, her name's Elizabeth King. We've Zoomed with her several times. And our team talks to her pretty regularly. But she said she did a training strategy for Lake Orion recently and offered to do the same for us. So your packet has the questions that she asked of Lake Orion. And she asked it of all their boards, all their development-related boards is how it's defined. But just some basic questions for, are you interested in, virtual training? Do you want to attend things in person? How long have you served? What are some other things you've done in the past? So it was a pretty basic survey to get an idea of baseline where they were at on training, and then she made a more formal training plan based on this input. So we were asked if we want to pursue that same kind of thing for all of our development related boards, which is everyone here. So if you're interested, Elizabeth will send you a survey in the very near future. Are we interested?
And it's free?
Yes.
Totally free. Yes. All right. Yeah. It won't take you more than 10 or 15 minutes to complete.
Anything free.
Okay. It checks off one more RRC best practice, which is great. The zoning ordinance is going to do the bulk of the heavy lifting of what's left of our best practices. There's so many things in there that are related to the zoning ordinance. So thanks, Doug. But we're getting close, and we're plotting how to get us to the finish line. So we're scheming a day to meet with Elizabeth and knock out the rest of our best practices. So cool.
And who's on your board?
Yeah.
I'm not sure everybody knows.
Yeah, the crew is all three boards. So we've got Matt, we've got Jenna, who's kind of the ace of all the boards. We've got Rick from the Planning Commission, and Tanya from Village Council, and me. There too. So, yeah, cool. I will relay that, and we will. You'll get that very soon from Elizabeth.
So whenever we've had a meeting, Beth handles everything for the village while we're in there, because
Yes.
you two are in there. In fact, those meetings are the only time Jenna gets to say whatever she's thinking. Because she's a participant. I love it, actually.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Okay, we'll go to the adult use marijuana establishment ordinance update.
So everybody's aware, I think, at this point, the village got to vote on the proposed marijuana establishments ordinance on Tuesday. It was passed. So it was a yes vote by a total of 5 votes out of nearly 500 votes cast. It's very close. We are working on the process with the Brandon Township clerk because it was so close. If a recount is I understand it's not an automatic, but to kick the tires on that and work through that process with Roslyn, we've been doing that all week. So more to come, but because it was voted in the affirmative, the village attorney, Mr. Mike Gildner, we've been talking quite a bit this week about what that looks like and what's next and our timeline and our process and all that good stuff. So he's joined us this evening. It is available, so questions or all that good stuff. I know that normally the planning commission gets to write the ordinance, right? And we know all about it. This one's a little different, so to say the least. So we've got an opportunity with questions and all that good stuff.
Maybe just start with what you guys talked about and bring us up to speed.
Floor is yours.
This is a functioning microphone?
Yeah, and it just gets recorded, so it doesn't reverberate. Yeah.
So just, give me a signal or something if you can't hear me. So, our conversations were, covered the range, first of all. What the margin of error was and the margin of victory, and in this case it was very small. And then secondly, really what are the next steps? That was the question that Ryan was asking. What are the next steps with all of this? The ordinance as written says that it becomes effective 10 days following approval by the electors. And it says it must be codified per usual practices. So the 10 days following approval, I don't believe is calendar days. We're going to be looking at 10 days following certification of the results, which is at some point here in the future. I asked Ryan to just touch base and find out if he had a date from the township about when certification may take place. So that 10 days has not started running. It will be running, we expect it probably in the next 2 weeks. The business about codification per usual, that's something that the village council must do. I don't, as I read the ordinance that I did not prepare and no one else here prepared, I don't think that really has anything to do with when it's effective. It's the strangest thing in the world. Any ordinance that we ever do says it's effective upon publication or 10 days following publication or whatever the case may be. This doesn't say that. It's different language. So I'm taking the position it's 10 days following certification, and yet the village council must also adopt this ordinance at your
August 22nd.
August 22nd.
The results are still unofficial as of right now, by the way.
The ordinance also says that applications will be made available by the village within 60 days of the effective date. I sent to Ryan a sample application from the village of Holly, and that's all it was meant to be. It's just instead of reinventing the wheel, here's what another community that has looked at it has done, and I just sent that to him this afternoon. So I would encourage council to sit down with that, just as a working draft, and decide, do they want their application to look like that or to look like something altogether different. Once the applications then are made available, they are taken in by the applicants and then submitted. But I mean, that's all the administrative process. And in the absence of us providing an application within that time frame, the ordinance says that applicants can simply provide information but not on a pre-prepared application. So, short answer is it's not effective yet. It will be effective very soon, and that's going to start the 60-day clock ticking. I think that's all we're talking about.
That's the bulk of it, yeah.
Any questions?
I have just,
How many locations are there even available for these stores?
So there's a total of 2 establishments
Okay.
allowed under the ordinance. And the actual number of physical locations that qualify, well, I will say this. I received a phone call today from a lawyer indicating that he's a real estate lawyer looking at possibly doing a deal here, and he wanted to know some more about this park that is designated. And my understanding is that that same person called Ryan yesterday.
We've gotten about 40 phone calls a day since Tuesday regarding this specifically in the office.
Did you receive the microphones?
Speak into the microphone.
Or you can hold it, either one.
You're on the spot.
Yeah, so I spoke with Ryan and then left a voicemail with that individual indicating that because the message that he conveyed to me was he wasn't sure it was a park, and in talking to Ryan, he didn't think Ryan really knew if it was a park. When I talked to Ryan, there was no doubt what he thought, nor was there any doubt about what I thought. It's a park. It was deeded with a specific restriction that it be used for park purposes. So I left that individual a message saying, it is a park, no question about it. I say that because there are a number of locational restrictions, a distance from a park being one of them. Now here I'm going to turn to Ryan because I have not sat down and mapped out how many vehicles go by this location, how far is it from a church or from a park, and so on. I know that was done by one member of council, and Ryan mentioned it. I don't know if you have that in front of you.
I don't, but the long and the short is the ordinance calls for up to 2. As we know, it seems to have been intentionally written with at least 1 parcel in mind. I engaged our engineers to do a survey that will list parcels where it's possible. So we will know exactly what's possible with the 60-day window and then the scoring application. I talked to them about our timeline for when we need that. So by the time we get to the scoring stage, when we've got applications, we will know, okay, you're applying with this parcel number. We know it is not possible there. So thanks for your $5,000 application fee, but it doesn't work here. So we will know very definitively by them. There's a pretty good idea of where it could be, but everyone who calls and asks that question, realtors and prospective developers or whoever, I tell them the burden is on them to bring it with their application to say, I'm putting it on this parcel and here's why it meets that specification.
Okay, I got you.
So I won't tell them where they can put it. When we have the list from our engineer, we will know with matter-of-factly where it can be.
Outstanding.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Ryan, that part of this is there's a non-refundable application of up to $5,000 per application, and that isn't something that gets refunded to them because they don't qualify or they weren't selected. So if we get all of that in, then we do it and look to see whether or not they meet those locational restrictions and go from there.
So the clerk should get 10% of that.
The clerk should get at least 10% of that, but I don't know if that's legal.
Did you say it would be refunded to them or would not?
Would not.
Okay, that's.
Yep.
Does the council have to set that price?
Yes, because it says up to 5.
Yeah.
So we need to.
Yeah,
I'm assuming you're going to choose 5, but yes.
Question, you mentioned that in the absence, they would just submit information. But I'm wondering, considering what I've heard about other communities that have had lawsuits from people who were rejected, and then we have this completely defined scoring system, as was mentioned, would a well-defined application that completely covers all the information needed to properly assess against that scoring system help protect us somewhat against litigation in that case like that?
Absolutely. So I represent Holly. Holly is one of the communities that recently embraced the idea, and they were sued predictably. And now there, it was a different argument. The different argument was that they had imposed some locational restrictions that were arbitrary. Here, again, this was given to us. This was imposed on us. And so I think that as long as your application requires the things that are listed in that ordinance as necessary information, you are hewing to that line. And I think you're doing the best that you can to protect yourself from those sorts of lawsuits.
Was that same or very similar ordinance on the ballot in other communities around Michigan? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know.
I can tell you that Brandon Township received a petition at the last hour.
Right.
So to be put on the November ballot. I don't know if it's the same one, the same group. I'm not sure about details, but I know there's a similar petition about marijuana
There's a
retail
zoning application
establishments.
for one dispensary.
One dispensary?
So we can somehow fit 2 in the village, but only 1 in the rest of Brown.
That's curious.
I think theirs was, they kind of got ahead of it and somebody helped write it to fit the township better than, it is not like ours.
So as township residents, you'll get to vote on that again, likely in the future.
I think I kind of misheard what you said, Ryan. Did you say that the township has received a request to put it on the ballot?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I have no idea the impact of this, but the village sits inside the township. How would those two, could there be competing, could those two ordinances be competing to force a third in the village potentially?
Short answer, I don't think so. Now, I haven't seen this language, right? So I don't know what the locational restrictions are there.
Unfair question.
What zoning district, et cetera. But this ordinance of villages applies within your borders. And, I understand you sit within the township, but no, I don't think that we're going to find them compete.
Wouldn't that be like Holly Village and the township?
Exactly. It's the same concept, yeah.
Yeah, we're 2 separate municipal entities with our own jurisdiction over our own areas.
So, okay, is there any other questions or? So you're gonna, as it moves along, as far as that, the commissions here will be notified of where you're at?
The first thing we're gonna do then is August 22nd. That is the only thing that we have to do.
In the meantime, there's no collective steps. We'll be working on the application process and the forms. So between Mike, Jenna, and I will be
I
talking
know,
about that.
I talked with Jenna, did you get some of the Ligorians? There were some forms that are already out there in different municipalities that are already done, and with the scoring. And Lapeer has them too, actually.
Yeah. And then we'll do lots of R&D. We will rip off and duplicate and make sure it is tailored to our particular ordinance.
Yeah, that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because they've already, like Ligorian has been scoring and doing applications for several years now.
Have you had any open stores yet in Lake Orion? Is there any facilities that are operating in Lake Orion?
Right on 24?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
And also I don't even know how to put this all together. And some of the paperwork that we received, Jen signed it, right? And there was a Bloomfield Hills address. That was a P.O. box. And
oh, yeah.
particular Jen, they have a weed distribution business on Brown Road in Lake Orion. They manufacture, and they started that in 2019.
I do know that. I did know that.
I think it'd be
Holly
prudent for
doesn't
us to
have any
get.
retail currently, or?
They just
They
got
just-
approved.
Right, their ordinances, oh gosh, within the last maybe 2 months, 3 months,
Yeah, at
something
most.
like that, maybe even sooner than that. No, they have no establishments right now.
They selected 2.
They have.
Yeah, they're working through the
But-
conditional
Yeah.
approval.
Yeah.
There are none operational right now.
No.
I drove through Lapeer today and there were at least 3 of them.
I live in
Apparently.
Medford. There's a lot more than 3.
I saw 3.
There's one right across the street from the
And
police
those
station too.
places are
Yeah.
Well, that's
busy
Yeah.
all the time,
It's,
all the time. It's amazing to me.
Burton has a large number as well.
Yeah, that's why I'm grateful we left access management in our master plan. MDOT does all the driveway permitting for M15, but we can say we don't want to have a new driveway for every, business and things like that, so we can put our finger on the scale a little bit. with driveways.
Traffic's gonna be the huge issue.
Sure it is.
We're the ones that are stuck between all these other ones. M15's gonna be lined up like going to the Renaissance.
okay, you think Granger's bad now? Yeah.
Well, that means a bunch of deceleration lanes all the way along the highway.
Well, I remember Bill Dinnan proposed that they could even have like a separate lane where you exit off and then the lane serves the businesses there and then merges
Just
back
like
on
over at
after.
Randy Wise.
Similar to Randy Wise,
That
yeah.
area.
There's a lot of places where they have that, where you actually exit the main road onto like a kind of almost a service drive along type of this thing to get to all the businesses.
take a
And something
long
like
way.
that would work well.
For a while.
Yes. So so immediate steps come to the village council and us, but planning commission, plenty more to come with site plans and approvals, and there's lots that you will get to do. So we'll become very familiar with this over the next several months and beyond.
Well,
I thought with that big ordinance we were just out of, that was voted in, I thought we wouldn't have anything to do with it.
We don't have anything to do with the ordinance, but
No
we have a lot
ordinance.
of work as a result of the
Yeah.
ordinance. And I think it would behoove us to be proactive and get as much ahead up front so that we don't get caught by surprise when we get flooded with all the applications.
Ryan, did you say that we are going to a recount?
Yes.
That's what we're waiting on with Ron's.
Yeah, so like I said, the results are still unofficial. They will become official in the county has up to 14 days after to certify, and they have to certify every precinct, there's 500 some precincts in the county. So Rosalind said they will be getting to us soon. So like, it may be as soon as tomorrow, might be Monday kind of thing. It's inconclusive when, but it will be soon. And at that point, a recount can be requested.
And how do we request it?
I've reached out to the head of Oakland County Elections twice to find out. I'm not the only person trying to contact him, I'm sure. But we will make sure we get the process done. We have, after it's certified, we have a 6-day window in which to apply for a recount. So there's time there.
And is there a cost associated with that?
There is.
And Rosalind, I know she was gonna find out,
She was digging on it, and I was trying to dig into it. I know similar races where it's only a precinct, because it's only one precinct, it's likely under $100.
Yeah.
But I'm not
Closer
not
to
sure.
25.
It's probably more like 20. Yeah, you would know. Yeah. Yeah. So it's not a wild expense, but there is some expense included.
On the applications, the only thing they can apply for is an approved piece of property. Or they can just go along and fill out an application for every building along 15. But doesn't the application require some, not necessarily approval of the landowner or the building owner, that there is an agreement that they would let them be there if it was approved? So doesn't that limit the amount of applications that we're going to get? It'll come down to getting applications for just those buildings.
So the applications cannot be like road names. We want to be approved, we're not really sure where, it could be in any of these locations. It has to be tied to a particular piece of property. It would be smart of them to make sure that they meet all of the locational restrictions in the ordinance. And so, yes, I think that necessarily limits the number of places where it can be located. And I know it can, because I think, Anthony, I thought it was you. You had looked at it and identified there's only maybe these 3 or so parcels that, as I remember, it was at council.
I think it was actually one. There was only one that I can
Yeah.
remember for sure.
What I'm getting at is that the applications are only going to be 1 or 2 that the village is going to receive for their license or to move forward with it.
1 or 2 that we will move beyond saying, okay, it's at Ken's house, it's out.
Right, exactly.
So that was the example for our meeting, so
Yeah.
sorry to pick on you.
You know, one question is, depending on if there's like 2 or 3 potential parcels, depending on where the first one goes, couldn't that potentially invalidate one of the other parcels? Because I know there's also restriction on distance between them too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good.
I think it's just 500 feet, I think is all that's got to
It was
be.
500, yeah, it's not much.
But if there's only a couple parcels in play, yeah.
Right.
My question is this, if, say they pick a spot and, you know, they pay their fee, and at that point, they realize, or we tell them, no, you can't do that, you can't put it there. If they strike a deal, do they have to resubmit another application, like, you know, they say, buy a parcel? Do they have to submit another application, another application, or do they go with the other? You know what I'm saying? Because there's 2 parcels that would be involved.
If it's a different parcel, I would think it would have to be a separate
But, you know,
application.
I've seen it, like I've said on this map
Another
here.
$5,000.
Buying parcels together, and it becomes one. But they would have to, I guess, is what my question is will they have to repay this fee to do the county?
Well, so the ordinance doesn't speak to that specifically. But I would argue, yes, they do. That's new work for us. It's a new application. So I think administratively, it behooves us to say that.
I think if the parcel description changes, that would be a separate application.
It's an altogether different
Well,
different person.
and the other thing too, though, is, well, I've got to get into it, something I don't want to get into it, but okay, no, I got my answer.
Buy up the houses and then request to rezone them so they're not residential.
Yeah, I get that.
All right, so I'll let you move
Yeah.
on to whatever's next on your
Adjournment.
Thank you very much.
No,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
joining us tonight.
I think every time we've had any meeting, even the other 2, each time it becomes a little easier to get a grip of what's up
Yes.
for the future of it, I think, every single time, so it's a learning curve. So with that, Planning Commission, motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Village Council?
Village Council accept a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, support.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
So Matt, you want to adjourn the DDA? Or?